Good afternoon. Welcome to everyone. This is our first World Leaders Forum event of 2024, and we are welcoming His Excellency, Ambassador Dennis Francis, President of the 78th Session of the United Nations General Assembly. I am Courtney Smith, Dean of the School of Diplomacy, and I am very pleased to have all of you with us this afternoon, both in person and online. Warm greetings to our guests, President Francis, members of his delegation, our own President, Dr. Katia Passerini, members of our Executive Cabinet, Board of Overseers, fellow deans, faculty, alumni, and in particular, our students. There's one group of students that I would like to recognize for their role in helping make this visit possible, and that's our 6 students who have interned with the Council of Presidents of the General Assembly. The work of Hamza Khan, Adam Moen, Michael Peel, Annalise Presky, Gabriela Salgado Durand, and Benjamin Smith helped build the connection to our guest, and I am very grateful. I would also similarly like to thank the leadership of the Council, Jahangir Khan and Hugh Dugan, and their colleagues providing this learning opportunity for our students. Seton Hall's mission is to empower our students to make a difference in the world, and one way the School of Diplomacy does this is by creating opportunities where our undergraduate and graduate students can learn from distinguished practitioners such as Ambassador Francis. This is the 3rd time we've hosted the President of the General Assembly, and it continues a tradition of welcoming world leaders, including 7 Nobel laureates, 3 UN Secretaries Generals, and 4 US ambassadors to the UN. This reflects our longstanding connections to the UN community and our commitment to preparing our graduates to build peace and foster social justice. Leading us in our mission of servant leadership is our interim president, Dr. Katia Passerini. She is a nationally recognized knowledge management scholar, and she answered the call, thankfully to all of us last summer, to unexpectedly become our president. We are fortunate to have her as our leader and to offer a few welcome remarks today.
Thank you, Courtney, and welcome everyone, and welcome Your Excellency. We are delighted to host you here at Seton Hall. What a great show of students. It's beautiful to see, and faculty, to see you all here. And I've just met Priscilla, one of the graduates of diplomacy, who's doing wonderful things at the UN now and also in local government. So that means that what this school is doing is really preparing you for the future. And we're delighted that we've seen it over and over to receive the guests that we have had and that we have today. I wanted to tell Ambassador that I was reading your bio and I saw that you retired in 2016. And then you also answered the call of servant leadership to take a job for a year. And I know you have an ambitious agenda that you'll share with us tonight. And all I want to say is a year looks like a short time to drive change. But as you will hear tonight, I know that a year is a very, very long time that we can use to drive change. So with that, I'd like to welcome tonight you and all of our guests. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Passerini. There are some of you here today that may not be all that familiar with the role of the President of the General Assembly, our PGA. So I want to say just a few words about the scope of work that our guest faces. The first Secretary General of the UN, Trygve Lie, saw that position as a consolation prize, and he actually wanted to be President of the General Assembly instead. That may seem surprising today, given the tremendous complexities that face the work of Ambassador Francis. That's because the General Assembly is unique among international organizations. It is the only one with both a universal membership and an expansive agenda. It brings together 193 member states, and every single one of them has their own interests and needs. They must balance pursuing a policy that recognizes international realities, but also their domestic considerations at the same time. And the issues that the General Assembly addresses, like the climate crisis, the wars in Ukraine and Gaza, any of the other ones on its agenda, are the most intractable and difficult. They were not solved in other venues. What strikes me then is not those occasions when the General Assembly cannot act, but in the many cases when it does act, often with a strong degree of consensus about what its members want to accomplish. These moments are often the result of the skill of the person running the negotiations, and that is typically the PGA. I would now like to welcome a good friend and colleague, Hugh Dugan, to introduce our guest. Hugh has been connected to our school for 24 years in a range of roles: adjunct professor, distinguished fellow with our Center for UN and Global Governance Studies, and as director of UN engagement. During much of this time, he worked at the U.S. mission to the UN, where he served 11 different U.S. ambassadors. He also served as acting presidential envoy for hostage affairs and as senior director for international organization affairs at the National Security Council. Mr. Dugan.
His Excellency Ambassador Dennis Francis, prior to his one-year term as president as of last September, had already distinguished himself as an eminent statesman of Trinidad and Tobago in many senior roles. Students, pay attention to him and learn. He is at once all things diplomatic, experienced yet humble, encyclopedic yet focused, noble and powerfully personable. This year has witnessed at least 64 national elections around the world, with a record 49% of the world's population voting. But please take a moment to absorb the following. The Assembly President is the single most representative official on this globe, elected by all the peoples, 100%. So although the Secretary General is more in the press, in protocol, the President has always held the highest authority in the organization of we the peoples. For a presidency of only 1 year, the learning curve is steep, and expectations on it are more than heavyweight, world weight, actually. All issues, security to development to human rights, spar for attention under the world's Superdome. Further, the Assembly's highest priest must take the confession of all UN entities accountable to the Assembly's universal membership, including the Security Council, whose members the Assembly elects, whose budget it approves, and whose program of work, including vetoes, it reviews. I mentioned earlier the word protocol. As this school teaches, protocol is what convenes sovereign equals orderly and dependably to the table. More importantly, it keeps them at the table, glued, one hopes. Yes, the ancient Greek protokolon actually translates as the first glue. President Francis knows how to adhere states together, to collaborate, and to consensus. Thusly, revitalizing the General Assembly is his personal commitment now and beyond. To this end, the school's Center for UN and Global Governance Studies has embarked on a long-term project on the role and authorities of the President in conjunction with the UN Council of Presidents of the General Assembly. Your interest is welcome in this project. President Francis is supported by his team with us today, our Chief of Cabinet, Colin Kalapile, Deputy Chief of Cabinet, Inga Conchavetti, Special Assistant Adam Hassan, and Shane Dowling, Team Leader for Political Affairs, Peace and Security. For them, the days are long, but the months are short. Preparing for September's Summit of the Future all depends greatly upon the team's skill, ability, and particularly upon President Francis' trademark warmth of character, which is the glue that seals the deals. What is even shorter is our time together here. So ladies and gentlemen, may I now invite to the podium His Excellency Ambassador Dennis Francis, President of the 78th Session of the United Nations General Assembly.
Thank you for that very warm introduction, Hugh. Dr. Katie Passerini, President of Seton Hall University, Dr. Courtney Smith, Dean of the School of Diplomacy and International Relations, Mr. Hugh Dugan, Seton Hall Fellow and Counselor of the Council of Former Presidents of the UN General Assembly, members of the faculty, esteemed students, alumni, distinguished guests, among whom I also see my dear friend, who is also the Secretary General of the Council of Former Presidents of the UN General Assembly. Let me begin by thanking Dean Smith and the School of Diplomacy and International Relations for the gracious invitation to join you today. It is indeed a great pleasure to engage with you, the young leaders of tomorrow, globalists by vision, at the World Leaders Forum. As I stand on this esteemed stage, I am reminded of my own journey, one that was profoundly influenced by the determined educators and mentors who both guided my path and opened my mind and a whole world of who I am today. Institutions like Seton are both society's great sculptors and liberators of human potential, providing the critical foundation that inspires and enables us to shape our societies and indeed our futures. It is no accident that in 2015, world leaders at the United Nations saw it fit to adopt Sustainable Development Goal 4 on quality education as part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The magnitude and sheer urgency of the crises confronting us demand that we transcend the confines of conformity and instead engage in deep analysis, critical thinking, and innovation. It is a job worthy of all of us, both individually and conjunctively. For these reasons, today I would like to focus on the role of the United Nations General Assembly in building peace, prosperity, progress, and sustainability for all. Peace, because it is the very foundation on which everything else is built, but which regrettably is in short supply today. When present, peace is the great enabler of a bright future. But when absent or lacking, it becomes the great destroyer of dreams and of aspirations, and, unfortunate though it is, of goodwill. Prosperity, because even though we live in a world of plenty, plenty is far from being equally enjoyed. On the contrary, millions of people, especially women and children, are left out and left behind, languishing in multidimensional abject poverty, and alarmingly will continue to do so in the year 2030. Progress, because we need it across the board. From realizing the Sustainable Development Goals and advancing gender equality, to reforming the unjust international financial architecture that unfairly disadvantages countries in the global south and which can no longer meet the demands and realities of a 21st century world characterized by a large and growing underclass. Sustainability, because all our efforts will be in vain if they cannot stand the test of time and the strains of human civilization to meet the needs of your generation and those of succeeding generations. These ideas not only guide the work of my presidency for the 78th session of the General Assembly, they represent the principles and values enshrined in the United Nations Charter, our guiding doctrine. But we will need your talents and your engagement to turn these aspirations into reality, because our collective responsibility is great and our time is short. As you know, the United Nations was established in 1945 with the fundamental goal of building peace, forged from the ashes of 2 world wars that had brought untold suffering to humanity. It should be noted that overall, the United Nations has been quite successful in avoiding a 3rd global conflagration. That is no mean feat. However, today we find ourselves once again on the brink and in real desperate need of a course correction. From the systemic denial of the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan, once again highlighted just last week by the blatant denial of their fundamental right to education, and the cascade of military coups in West Africa, to rampant gang violence in the streets of Haiti, and other entrenched conflict and humanitarian crises in places like Myanmar and Sudan. These and a myriad of other world events are truly straining the multilateral system in ways not seen in decades. Perhaps no 2 conflicts capture this grim reality more viscerally than the aggression against Ukraine and the ruinous escalation of violence in the Middle East, in Gaza. Just yesterday, the United Nations Security Council adopted a resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza for the month of Ramadan, leading to a lasting, sustainable ceasefire, breaking an immeasurably painful 5-month impasse. The resolution demands the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. It demands humanitarian access to address the medical and other humanitarian needs. And it demands compliance by all parties with their obligations under international law. While a commendable step in the right direction, this breakthrough comes after months of division preventing agreement on a crucial resolution to end the misery in the Gaza Strip. Gridlock, measured in the staggering death toll of over 32,000 Palestinian lives since October 7th. The unbearable humanitarian catastrophe continues to worsen amid searing accounts of preventable civilian deaths from famine, disease, or the shocking misfortune of being caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, in crossfire. What is needed now and not later, is a permanent ceasefire. The horrors of this senseless war come as the war against Ukraine enters its third bloody year, violating Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and its territorial integrity. The targeting of homes, schools, hospitals, and historic cultural sites, and regular bombardment of civilian and public infrastructure have not only wrought horrific destruction in Ukraine, but unleashed energy and food crises across the globe. Failure of the Security Council, which bears primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, to regularly discharge its duty, has cast an intense global spotlight on the General Assembly of the United Nations. In turn, the General Assembly, the world's parliament, which comprises all 193 UN member states, equal in voice and in vote, superpowers and small states alike, has been both active and ambitious in honoring its charter obligations to debate matters of peace and security, albeit in accordance with limited residual powers prescribed by the Charter. In the case of Ukraine, the Assembly has adopted 6 resolutions since March 2022, condemning the aggression, demanding that the Russian Federation withdraw all its forces from the territory of Ukraine, and calling for respect for international humanitarian law and the establishment of accountability mechanisms. In the case of Gaza, the General Assembly has unequivocally demanded an immediate humanitarian ceasefire and urgently called on all parties to uphold international law, protect civilians, unconditionally release all hostages, and ensure unimpeded access to life-saving humanitarian aid. To be clear, the Assembly's demands carry the moral and political weight of the overwhelming majority of the international community. And as I have repeatedly done before, I now assert them here without reservation. What does all of this mean for Seton Hall, for you here today? Nobel laureate and education activist Malala Yousafzai once said, "Education is neither Eastern nor Western. It is human." However, as we gather in the relative safety of the United States, across the world, schools and other places protected under international humanitarian law are being targeted with bombs. Millions of students in conflict zones are unable to attend school due to security concerns or have simply no school left to attend. Others are fighting for their right to education. Quite literally, education is under attack. Many people are dying before they have a chance to get there, their dreams evaporating into the pernicious realities of conflict and sheer survival. My hope is that their experiences will spark a fire inside and animate you to channel your energies towards meaningful change, to foster solidarity, to build bridges, and above all, to work daily to promote, and to secure peace. Dear friends, let me assure you that in the General Assembly, we are doing our part to shift the dynamics at play. The member states, especially from the Global South, are determined to alter the status quo, to ensure that global governance and international institutions are not perpetually stuck in the past, but adapt to the present realities. Importantly, as the biggest harvest for 2024, we have set our sights on the Summit of the Future in September, when world leaders will gather in New York to forge a new global consensus on how to deliver better for people and for planet. Over the next 6 months, member states will intensify their negotiations on the summit's anticipated outcomes, the Pact of the Future, the Declaration on Future Generations, and the Global Digital Compact. Together, these instruments, if intergovernmentally agreed, will have a profound effect on future generations. But we cannot expect success without hearing from those who will carry forward these efforts towards a brighter future. That's you. The world's 1.2 billion young people are rightfully demanding a seat at the table. And personally, I am listening. I make it a priority to regularly engage with young people here in New York and on all my official visits abroad. And I have been greatly inspired by the students with whom I have interacted in the Republic of Korea, in Haiti, Uganda, Kenya, Japan, China, India, Qatar, Austria, and elsewhere. At the UN, I also continue to urge member states to engage meaningfully with civil society and other stakeholders, and of course, the young people, throughout their intergovernmental negotiations, recognizing that your ideas are absolutely critical to our success. As globalists and young leaders, I encourage you to be involved in taking charge of the future, your future, that you will inherit. As the late Secretary General Kofi Annan once reminded us, the world is not ours to keep. We hold it in trust for future generations. At the United Nations, the ECOSOC Youth Forum, which is held annually in April, is a key platform I would highly recommend for you to contribute to policy discussions through collective ideas, solutions, and innovations. Importantly, I am delighted that this year the forum will have an additional third day dedicated to formulating the youth's contribution to the Summit of the Future. Everywhere, young people recognize that our efforts today will prove meaningless tomorrow if we do not find ways to live sustainably on this planet. That our unbridled drive for economic growth and runaway profits is polluting the water we drink, the air we breathe, and disrupting the intricate ecological balance on which all life depends. Young people understand that while climate change is dire, it is solvable, and we need ample, predictable financing to undertake the necessary reforms. We were long warned about the looming climate crisis, but we did not take timely action. And only now we are playing catch-up. The imperative to address the triple planetary crises of climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss has now become an emergency. It is also inconceivable to hear that if we do not act now, we will have more plastic than fish in the oceans and seas by 2050. More plastic than fish. But we can't eat plastic. My open questions to you today are, how can we strengthen adaptive capacities and resilience? How can we better mitigate climate-related loss and damage? How can we ground our actions in the values of equality, dignity, and solidarity? To maintain focus on these questions, I will convene the first United Nations Sustainability Week in just a few weeks, from the April 15th to 19th at UN headquarters. This week will feature dedicated events focused on sustainability in sectors of transformational importance: tourism, infrastructure connectivity, transport, energy, and critically address the soaring debt levels that have exacerbated poverty and inequality for many countries. Our goal, as ever, to unleash progress across the 2030 agenda towards a more sustainable future, as we also ready ourselves for the Summit of the Future, one in which the UN's principle of leaving no one behind resounds as an unmistakable call to action. I am counting on you to tune in, but in reality, to do more than simply tune in. I urge you to own the sustainability challenge. How? Join the hashtag UNActNow campaign. Be public on social media about how you are choosing sustainability today to ensure a better future for all tomorrow. Dear friends, let me close by appreciating Seton Hall's efforts in supporting multilateralism and the work of the United Nations. A good example of steadfast collaboration, and you've heard this before this afternoon, is that your Seton Hall fellow, Hugh Dugan, himself a veteran multilateral diplomat, who served at the United Nations before, has been working closely with us in his role as Counselor of the Council of Former Presidents of the United Nations General Assembly. Through its unique alliance with the United Nations Association, USA, its Center for UN and Global Governance, and its model UNs, Seton Hall is preparing future generations of global leaders and global citizens. That's you. For the challenges on the horizon. We will pass some of those challenges to you. It seems to me to make good sense to start thinking about them now. I am deeply encouraged and indeed grateful by your enthusiasm and engagement. especially when the United Nations is rightfully and very publicly under intense distress and public scrutiny. There is a saying that all serious daring comes from within. Progress starts with you. Dare to prioritize and to build peace. Dare to stand for equality and non-discrimination. And dare to do better and to demand more than your elders. There is a deficit of trust among member states of the UN. Show us how, in your view, trust can be nurtured and understanding cultivated, however impossible you might think this to be. In the aftermath of the Second World War, leaders dared to believe that countries could unite around a greater purpose of collective peace and prosperity. They made history, and it is now left to our generation to write the next chapter of that history. Today we need your audacity, your ability to make common cause and to build something greater, more inclusive, more powerful for future generations. Thank you again for offering me the stage. I would like nothing more than to hear your invaluable fresh thoughts and opinions. Let's get into the issues now. I thank you.
So President Francis has to give a speech at the UN at 6:30. That means we have about 10 more minutes with him, okay? So we're very fortunate to have him on a busy day. And we have some students that submitted questions in advance, so I'd like to go to them. And students, you know to keep your questions brief so we can get to as many as possible. We're going to start with Etta Moen. Oh, the mic's working. Thank you. Using.
All right. Hello.
Be nice to me, Etta.
I'll do my best. What is your view of the progress of gender mainstreaming in the UN headquarters and other UN entities? And what more could the UN be doing to ensure gender parity throughout the entire UN? Thank you.
It's a great question. Thank you very much for it. What is my view? My view is that while progress has been made, substantial progress has been made, it's not gone far enough and fast enough. The reality is, based on the available statistical analysis, that at current rates of change, it would take, get ready for this, 265 years for women to catch up with men in the world. Can you imagine that? Now, so we have, both within the UN and globally, we have a lot of work to do to close the gap, meaningfully close the gap between men and women. Men, of course, having enjoyed superior privilege for centuries. As President of the General Assembly, it's a priority of my presidency, actually, to achieve this. And so I've taken a number of measures. I've appointed a special envoy on gender equality and women's empowerment. I've reappointed a special advisory group on mainstreaming of gender issues into the work programs of the United Nations. I'm a gender champion myself. When we constitute committees or small groups, I always ensure that there is gender balance. In appointing the staff of my office, which amounts to something in the order of maybe 54 staff, I had committed before taking the office that we would seek to achieve gender equity. We've gone past achieving equity. We've actually achieved parity. In fact, we've gone past parity because there are more women in my office than there are men. These are deliberate decisions that have been made. And they have got to be deliberate because old habits, as you know, die hard. I mean, I'm a guy like any other guy. But, you know, we just can't leave it to happenstance. It is not fair to our women. They are productive in the same way that we are, and they should be given every opportunity and supported to make those contributions to their society and to their communities. And so that will remain a high priority on the agenda of my presidency, and I dare say, on the agenda of the UN. I should also mention that there is a proposal in the 75 or so years of the history of the United Nations. There have only been 4 women to occupy the position of President of the General Assembly. That is not a good look for an organization that claims to be democratic. It's not a good look. And in that time, there has never been a Secretary General who is a woman. So something is clearly not working well. But let's be a little bit more analytical, because when I sit in the high rostrum and look out at the assembly, it's a sea of men. It's a sea of men. We are not seeing enough women as delegates in the UN. So the process has to go back and start fundamentally at the beginning, where countries need to be encouraged to recruit more female diplomats. There's an interesting statistic, actually, that when women sit at the table to negotiate, the outcomes are of a higher quality, are much more effective, and last longer. Because there's something that women bring to the table that produces that effect. And where we are now in a world confronted by issues of peace and war, certainly there's a place for women at that table. I remember, I'm not American, but I remember seeing President Biden appoint women generals in the army, and I felt such excitement that this was taking place. Because people need to be rewarded on the basis of their merit. And clearly, these women, these outstanding women, have got a lot to offer to their country. So we must cultivate and encourage that. It does not minimize us as men. It doesn't. Our roles will not be reversed. In fact, I've read an article some time ago that suggests that if women were allowed to contribute uninhibited in their societies, global GDP would increase by $26 trillion. Can you imagine that? Do you know how much good can be done with $26 trillion? How many schools, hospitals, healthcare centers, transportation infrastructure can be created with that money to improve the standard of living and welfare of people? So, yes, we are working on it. but we need your help. We need your help as young people. And you young men must learn to value the women in our society in the same way that you value your sisters and your moms. They are no different. And in time, your daughters. Why would you want someone to denigrate, disrespect, and treat your own daughter unfairly? Just think about it for a moment, and you'll see the logic. So, next question.
I think we're going to actually, instead of doing another question so we can make sure we get you to your next event, I'd like to call on one of our students, one of our student leaders, Jesiel Ford, to present our guests with a small token of our appreciation.
I feel a little like I'm shortchanging. I'll take one.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Jesiel, wait right there. So then the next on the list is the next on the list is Cameron Bird.
Hey, Ambassador Francis, thank you for being here today. You've touched upon the experience you have interacting with people of various backgrounds, individuals, groups, organizations. What have you found to be the most effective methods of organizing common goals, common interests when you are dealing with people with such various interests and investments that they're looking towards? Thank you.
That's an interesting question. It's an interesting question because when you start digging deep, you make an extraordinary discovery. And that is that most people, regardless of where they are in the world, actually want the same things. They want to live in a safe environment. They want to be able to look after their kids, to provide them with food, shelter, and clothing, the things they need. They want their kids to have a good education. They want their kids to succeed. They want to make a contribution to their societies. They want to devote themselves often to something larger than themselves. So it turns out we aren't quite that different as we tend to spend time thinking that we are. We all have red blood, we all have DNA, we all have some level of spirituality. The difference comes, perhaps, with culture and maybe with history. But difference and diversity is not something that we should allow to divide us. Because division leads inevitably to conflict. It is the richness of the diversity that makes the world interesting. Can you imagine you'd get up in a place and when you look out, all you see would be the same thing every day? After a while, it becomes dull. It's uninteresting. You don't feel stimulated. But if you take the time to discover, I saw on CNN. I'm a big CNN junkie. I saw on CNN last week that there was a school in Connecticut that banned, a residential school, banned cell phones from the schools. The kids were mad at first. And then they discovered, the kids, that because they didn't have their cell phones, they were making new friends. They were sitting in the dining hall with people they had not spoken to before and realizing, wait a minute, these guys are interesting. We can hang out. We can do stuff together. Simply by being open to engaging with other people, sometimes of the same race, sometimes of a different race. But just having that openness gave them a sense. In fact, one of the girls said, "I feel liberated without my cell phone." So diversity is something to celebrate because it enriches society, and you get the opportunity to combine the best of what is in each of us. It helps society. You know, I know there's a big discussion going on in the United States about immigration and all of that. But diversity does contribute. We ought not to allow these basic instincts that sometimes exist to cause us to dehumanize others because they are people just like us. They have the same needs as we do. They deserve to be treated with respect and to have their dignity upheld. These are UN values. These are the values that we would like the entire world to emulate, because in emulating those values, we create the conditions and the foundations for peace and harmony. It is when you create conflict, when you ill-treat and denigrate others, that inevitably there will be a clash that can spin out of control, and before you know it, we are in war. 33,000 people, innocent people, gone in an avoidable war. It's not good. We can and we must do much better. And it is up to your generation to work to achieving that. I'll take one more.
Okay. So then the next question is going to come from well, that's all. Well, we'll end on a tough one. Okay. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I just want to say thank you, Ambassador Dennis Francis, for the wonderful speech. I'm Priscilla, and I am one of the alumni from the School of Diplomacy, and I'm a product of this wonderful school. And I want to say thank you for your speech. It was very enlightening, and I am so glad that you touched upon different subjects about why, you know, it is so important that we incorporate diversity, and not only that, but also the human, that as part of the peace building, we have to commit to making our future better. And I have a question, because, I am actually a UN rep for Women's Federation for World Peace, and I have been involved in the CSW 68 planning of the conference, so and other roles as well. And the one question that I do have is, what is being done in order to include more discussions about at-risk groups in taking part in the leadership decision table, especially when it comes, yes, we have to, especially people who have different conditions or disabilities, because, they have to be part of the decision-making process. I advocate for the people with disabilities as well, and, they have to have more representation, and there should be enough discussion about incorporating people with these types of challenges in the leadership table and discussions, whether it's in civil society, whether it's in building partnerships, because if we incorporate these groups, then it is easier for them to have more opportunities for employment, more opportunities for access to healthcare, and that could easily be a segue to eradicate poverty and also other things as well. Thank you.
Oh. It's a very powerful and relevant question, because people from the differently abled community note the language differently abled are discriminated against, sometimes systemically discriminated against, and wrongly so. That's why in the Sustainable Development Agenda, you'll often read the word inclusion. This is about bringing everyone on board. It's about respecting everyone's human dignity. Everyone, regardless of whether you are differently abled, regardless of what your sexual orientation is, every one of us are born with human dignity. And so being fair and just to everyone requires that we recognize that human dignity and treat people fairly, like human beings. It has nothing to do with whether you like them or you don't like them, or whether you went to the same school, or whether I went to Harvard and you went to Yale, or none of that. It has simply to do with the condition of being human. And so thanks for the question, because we are, again, it's a work in progress. I had, for example, committed at the beginning of my presidency to ensure that I have at least one member of staff on my team who is differently abled. And we came this close through negotiations to make it happen. And then the person decided unexpectedly to pursue other channels of work. To this day, I have this gnawing feeling that my team isn't quite complete. Because I believe very deeply that leaders must lead by example. You should not be asking people to do things that you yourself are not doing or are not prepared to do. And people with disabilities do face discrimination. Wrongly so. We have to make a more determined effort to respect them in the way we respect everybody else, and to help and support them in their daily lives. They don't, they don't demand anything. All they demand is respect. And we should be prepared to give it. Because guess what? None of us is sure that we will not become disabled tomorrow. We're not sure. Your life can be changed in a second through an accident or a fall or some disease. Think about it for a moment. No? And so I'll close my discussion with you by saying a brief word on human rights. If you treat everyone in accordance with their human rights, we will solve many of the problems in the world. Treating people fairly, and justly. We all have them. We are born with them. You cannot take them away. It is wrong. But think about it. Why should anyone treat you with dignity if you're not prepared to treat them with dignity? You have no moral authority to demand what you do not give. So the next time you're tempted to do or say something that really goes to disrespecting another human being's human rights, think again. Pause and think again. It's been my pleasure to spend this afternoon with you.
Thank you, Ambassador Francis. Those words were at the same time both sobering and inspirational, and I think that's one of the reflecting of the times we live in, and I'm so glad that were extra generous with your time to spend with our students, and I'd just like to ask Jaziel to present you with a small token of your appreciation of your visit with us.